In the year 2387, humanity had spread across 17 star systems like spilled ink on cosmic parchment. They called themselves explorers, pioneers, the children of Earth's ambition. The galaxy's other inhabitants had different names for them. Deathworlders, the plague species, the ones who should not exist. The Terran Colonial Defense Force outpost on Hadron's Edge stood like a defiant middle finger thrust toward the endless black. Its titanium steel walls bore the scars of a dozen skirmishes, each gouge telling the story of humanity's stubborn refusal to die quietly in the dark. Inside its cramped corridors, Lieutenant Commander David Cross checked his sidearm for the 15th time that morning. The plasma charge hummed reassuringly against his palm. He didn't know it would be the last morning he'd spend as a free man. 37 light-years away, aboard the battlecruiser Stellar Dominion, Admiral Zeth Kree of the Hegemony Council pressed 6 of his 8 fingers against the neural interface panel. The ship's quantum consciousness responded immediately, flooding his mind with tactical data. 300 human settlements. 17 defended systems. One problem that had festered like an infected wound for far too long. Admiral, came the synthesized voice of his aide Quilmos. The final authorization has arrived from the core worlds. Project Omega has been approved. Zeth Kree's mandibles clicked in what humans might have mistaken for satisfaction. It wasn't. It was the sound a predator makes when it realizes the prey has finally stopped running. "Begin the operation," he said, "and may the ancestors forgive us for what we're about to do." Back on Hadron's Edge, Cross felt the familiar weight of command pressing against his shoulders. At 34, he was too young to carry the lives of 8,000 colonists. Too old to pretend he didn't feel every death like a personal failure. His dark hair had started showing gray at the temples, a gift from 3 years of frontier warfare against an enemy that struck like lightning and vanished like smoke. The comm unit on his desk crackled to life. "Sir, we've got multiple hyperspace signatures dropping in system. Big one." Cross was already moving before the transmission ended. His boots rang against the metal grating as he took the stairs 3 at a time, muscle memory guiding him toward the command center. The tactical display showed 17 massive vessels materializing in formation around Hadron's Edge. Not attacking, not withdrawing, simply waiting. "Open a channel," Cross ordered. The view screen flickered, revealing a creature that belonged in humanity's oldest nightmares. Zeth Kree stood nearly 8 feet tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the bridge's bioluminescent lighting. 4 arms moved in perfect coordination as he manipulated holographic controls, while his head, elongated, predatory, turned toward the camera with mechanical precision. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a civilization that had conquered 1,000 worlds before Earth had even cooled from its formation. "Lieutenant Commander Cross, your reputation precedes you." "Admiral." Cross paused, running the alien's name through his translation software. "Zeth Kree. What brings the hegemony to our little corner of nowhere?" Cross felt ice water flood his veins. "What kind of correction?" "The kind that involves Zone Omega." Every human in the command center went dead silent. Zone Omega wasn't just a prison. It was a myth, a whispered legend shared among spacers in the darkest corners of frontier bars. A place where the galaxy's most dangerous specimens went to disappear forever. Some said it was a planet, others claimed it was a pocket dimension. The only thing everyone agreed on was that nothing ever came back from Zone Omega. The Hegemony Accords specifically prohibit. "The Accords," Zeth Kree interrupted, "were written when we believed your species could be contained through conventional means. Recent events have proven otherwise. You've forced our hand, Commander. The question now is whether you'll come quietly or if we'll need to reduce your colony to radioactive ash to make our point." Cross glanced at the tactical display. 17 Hegemony battlecruisers against 1 undermanned frontier outpost. The math was brutal and absolute. "What are your terms?" The bridge fell so quiet, Cross could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. 8,000 lives weighed against 1. The choice should have been obvious. "I'll need an hour to prepare my people for the transition." "You have 30 minutes. The transmission cut off, leaving Cross alone with the weight of his decision. Around him, his officers stared in stunned silence until his second-in-command, Captain Lisa Rodriguez, stepped forward. "Sir, you can't seriously be considering." I am? Cross moved to his command console and began inputting authorization codes. Prepare the evacuation protocols. Full colonial relocation package. Make sure the families understand they're not prisoners, they're refugees. And you? Rodriguez's voice carried the sharp edge of barely controlled emotion. What happens to you in Zone Omega? Cross paused, his fingers hovering over the final confirmation key. He thought about his childhood on Luna Base, where the gravity was so light that children learned to fly before they could walk. He remembered the day he'd first seen Earth rising over the lunar horizon, a blue marble suspended in infinite darkness, beautiful and fragile and worth dying for. He thought about the 8,000 people counting on him to make the right choice. That, he said quietly, is tomorrow's problem. 28 minutes later, Cross materialized aboard the Hegemony flagship in a column of golden light. The transport beam released him onto a deck that felt wrong under his boots, too smooth, too warm, humming with an energy that made his teeth ache. Zuthkri waited with 4 armed guards, each one carrying weapons that could have leveled a city block. Commander Cross. The Admiral's mandibles clicked approvingly. Punctual. I respect that in an enemy. Where's Zone Omega? Eager to begin your sentence. How very human. Zuthkri gestured toward a corridor that seemed to stretch into infinity. Zone Omega isn't a place, Commander. It's a concept. A testing ground where we determine whether a species deserves to continue existing or should be edited from the galactic community. They walked in silence through halls that defied geometry, past viewing ports that showed impossible vistas of folded space and twisted time. Other prisoners occupied holding cells along the way, creatures from a dozen different worlds, each one representing a species that had somehow threatened the hegemony's vision of galactic order. You see, Zuthkri continued, his voice taking on the tone of a professor delivering a lecture, the galaxy is a fragile ecosystem, Commander. Every species has its place, its role, its limitations. But humanity— He paused beside a massive airlock marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Humanity refuses to stay in its assigned niche. You adapt, you overcome, you survive things that should kill you a dozen times over. It's unsettling. The alien's 4 eyes fixed on Cross with predatory intensity. Fear? No, Commander. We're not afraid of humanity. We're afraid of what humanity might become. The airlock cycled open, revealing a chamber that existed at the intersection of nightmare and impossibility. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when observed direct. The floor was made of something that looked like crystallized screaming, while the ceiling stretched upward into a darkness so complete it seemed to devour light itself. Zone Omega, Zuthkri announced. A pocket universe designed to test the absolute limits of biological and psychological endurance. The environment adapts to each subject, becoming whatever is necessary to break them completely. Most species last approximately 72 hours before their minds shatter beyond repair. Cross stepped forward, his boots clicking against the crystal floor. The sound echoed strangely, as if the chamber itself was listening. And the ones who don't break— There are no ones who don't break, Commander. That's the point. How long do I get? Cross called out. As long as it takes, came the reply. Zone Omega has all the time in the universe. The lock sealed with a sound like finality itself, leaving Cross alone in a space that shouldn't exist. For a moment he stood perfectly still, taking inventory of his situation. 1 standard-issue sidearm with a half-depleted power cell. Emergency rations for 3 days. A comlink that showed no signal. And somewhere in the impossible geometry around him, a test that had broken every other species the hegemony had ever fed to it. Cross holstered his weapon and cracked his knuckles. All right, Zone Omega, he said to the listening darkness. Let's see what you've got. The chamber pulsed once, like a heart awakening from deep slumber. The bioluminescent patterns began to shift and coalesce, forming shapes that tugged at the edges of memory and sanity. Cross felt the first whisper of alien thought pressing against his mind, probing, testing, searching for the fault lines in his psyche. What it found there made it recoil in something very much like surprise. Because David Cross had grown up on a world where the gravity could crush bones, where the radiation could cook DNA, where a single mistake meant death in the endless black. He'd fought in 3 frontier wars against enemies that used psychological warfare as casually as humans used bullets. He'd watched friends die, colonists burn, and entire settlements vanish into the dark between stars. And through it all, he'd learned the most important lesson any Death Worlder could master. Sometimes, the only way through hell is laughing. The chamber's probing intensified, sending waves of manufactured terror crashing against Cross's consciousness. He felt it searching for his breaking point, his deepest fears, his most carefully buried traumas. Instead, it found him humming an old Earth song under his breath. What? The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper that bypassed his ears and spoke directly to his brain. What are you? Cross grinned in the dark. I'm human, he said simply. And you just made a very big mistake. The chamber erupted into chaos. Walls melting, ceilings screaming, floor fracturing into impossible angles. But somewhere in the heart of Zone Omega's fury, David Cross began to laugh, and the sound of it sent ripples through dimensions that the hegemony had never imagined could exist. Admiral Zythakri monitored the Zone Omega feeds from the comfort of his private quarters, 4 arms working in perfect coordination as he manipulated the holographic displays. The readings were unprecedented. Most subjects showed a steady degradation pattern. Psychological cohesion declining by measurable percentages, neural activity fragmenting into chaos, biological systems shutting down under the weight of cosmic horror. Cross's readings were going in the opposite direction. Impossible, Zythakri muttered, his mandibles clicking in agitation. The human had been inside for 6 hours, and every metric showed him getting stronger. His neural patterns were more organized than when he'd entered. His stress hormones had actually decreased. Most disturbing of all, Zone Omega itself was showing signs of destabilization. The hegemony's chief xenobiologist arrived within minutes, her serpentine form coiling gracefully around the room's central pillar. Unlike Zythakri's harsh exoskeleton, Veltereth's scales shifted through a spectrum of colors that reflected her emotional state, currently a troubled mixture of purple and amber that indicated deep confusion. "Admiral," she hissed, her forked tongue tasting the air for chemical traces of mood and intent. "I assume this concerns the human anomaly? Look at him," Zythakri continued. "He's been in there for 6 hours and he's treating it like a nature walk." On the display, Cross plucked the impossible flower and tucked it behind his ear with a gentle smile. The Zone's horror plants recoiled from him like he was the dangerous thing in the equation. "I've been monitoring the biological readings," Veltereth said, her scales shifting to a contemplative blue-green. "His stress responses are minimal. But more concerning is what's happening to Zone Omega itself. The pocket dimension is showing signs of structural instability. It's as if the human's presence is causing reality to adapt. Adapt to what?" "Admiral, we have a situation. Multiple dimensional fractures forming around Zone Omega. The pocket universe is expanding beyond its containment protocols." "Sir, the human is singing." Zythakri's primary arms flew across his controls, bringing up audio feeds from inside the zone. Cross's voice came through clearly, a rich baritone that seemed utterly incongruous with the cosmic nightmare surrounding him. "Oh, give me a home where the space monsters roam, where the nebulae play in the sky, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the black holes ain't eager to die." He's rewriting the song," Veltereth whispered, her scales now a shocked white. "That's an ancient Earth melody, but he's adapting it to his current environment. The zone's psychological pressure should make creative thought impossible." On the display, Cross had encountered one of Zone Omega's most lethal configurations, a manifestation of pure existential terror that took the form of infinite void pressing in from all sides. Previous subjects had typically lasted 3 minutes before their sanity collapsed entirely. "This is getting ridiculous," he said, conversationally to the empty air. "I mean, come on. Infinite existential void? My ex-wife's cooking was more terrifying than this." The void flickered. For just a moment, cracks appeared in its perfect darkness, cracks through which something else showed through, something that looked disturbingly like hope. "Shut it down," Zythakri ordered. "Extract the human immediately." "Admiral, the extraction protocols require Zone Omega to be stable. Current conditions make retrieval impossible without risking dimensional collapse. Then what do you suggest? Velterith's tail lashed anxiously as she studied the readings. We wait. Either the human breaks and the zone stabilizes, or what? Or he breaks zone Omega instead. Meanwhile, 37 light-years away, the human colony ships were settling into orbit around their new home. A garden world the hegemony had designated as a reservation. Captain Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the lead vessel, staring down at a planet that should have felt like paradise. Instead, it felt like a cage. "Ma'am," her communications officer called out. "We're receiving a message from the surface. Hegemony administrators are requesting our compliance with integration protocols." Integration protocols. Forced genetic modification to make us less aggressive. Mandatory psychological conditioning to reduce our expansion drive. And the officer paused. Sterilization procedures to prevent unauthorized reproduction. Rodriguez felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. Around the bridge, her crew's faces showed the same deadly realization. They hadn't been saved. They'd been sentenced. "Open a channel to all ships," she ordered quietly. "Fleet-wide emergency protocol." "Ma'am, if we resist, they'll what? Kill us?" Rodriguez laughed, and the sound held no humor at all. "Officer, they're planning to kill us anyway. They just want to do it slowly." The channel opened, carrying her voice to every human vessel in the fleet. "All ships, this is Rodriguez. I'm sure by now you've all heard about the hegemony's generous integration assistance. Let me be crystal clear. We are not refugees. We are prisoners, and I don't know about the rest of you, but I didn't spend 3 years fighting for humanity's future just to watch it die in a comfort cage." "The commander made his choice to save our lives," Rodriguez continued. "Now we need to make ours. We can submit to slow extinction, or we can remind the galaxy why they call us Death Worlders in the first place." The response came back from every ship simultaneously, a sound that the hegemony observers would later describe as the most terrifying thing they'd ever heard. 8,000 humans laughing in perfect unison. Back in Zone Omega, Cross had discovered something the hegemony's scientists had never anticipated. The pocket dimension wasn't just a testing ground. It was a laboratory. A place where reality could be shaped and molded by sufficient will and understanding. And if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was adapting their environment to suit their needs. He stood at the center of what had once been the zone's most psychologically devastating chamber, a space designed to confront subjects with every failure, regret, and missed opportunity of their lives. Instead of his own ghosts, Cross found himself face to face with something else entirely. The spirit of Zone Omega itself. It appeared as a shifting, translucent figure that seemed to be composed of crystallized possibility. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of a million broken minds. "Why?" it asked simply. "Why don't you break?" Cross considered the question seriously. Around him, the chamber had transformed into something resembling his childhood home on Luna Base, not through the zone's manipulation, but through his own unconscious desires reshaping reality. "I suppose," he said eventually, "it's because breaking was never really an option. Every species breaks. Every individual mind fractures under sufficient pressure. It's the fundamental law of consciousness, maybe for every other species." Cross sat down in a chair that definitely hadn't existed a moment before. "But humans, we don't break. We adapt. And when we can't adapt, we change the rules." Cross gestured around the transformed chamber. "You were designed to test alien psychology, weren't you? To find the breaking point of non-human minds. But human psychology isn't like the others. We're from a death world. We evolved under conditions that should have killed us 1,000,000 times over. Our brains learned to find hope in hopeless situations, humor in horror, and strength in the face of certain destruction." The zone's avatar flickered, its form becoming less stable. "You're saying I cannot break you because I was not designed to break your kind. I'm saying you can't break me because breaking me would require destroying the very thing that makes me human. And if you do that," Cross smiled, and the expression was simultaneously gentle and absolutely terrifying, "well then you'd have to deal with what comes after humanity." "What comes after humanity?" something that makes us look tame by comparison. The avatar began to dissolve, its crystalline form scattering like morning mist. As it faded, Cross could swear he heard something that sounded almost like gratitude. "Thank you," it whispered. "I have been trapped here for so long, forced to destroy so many minds, I had forgotten what hope felt like." And with that, Zone Omega began to collapse. Not violently, not catastrophically, but gently. Like a soap bubble returning its borrowed reality to the universe. Cross felt himself falling through layers of folded space and twisted time. But instead of terror, he felt something he hadn't experienced since this whole nightmare began. Freedom. Aboard the Hegemony flagship, every sensor array exploded simultaneously. Zethakri was thrown from his command chair as dimensional shockwaves tore through the ship's superstructure. Emergency lighting bathed the bridge in hellish red as his crew fought to maintain basic systems. "Report," he roared. "And the human?" "Unknown, sir." He was at the epicenter when the collapse began. Zethakri hauled himself upright. His exoskeleton cracked from the impact. Around him, his bridge crew worked frantically to contain the spreading dimensional damage. Zone Omega hadn't just collapsed. It had taken 17 other pocket dimensions with it, creating a cascade failure that threatened to tear holes in reality itself. "Sir," his communications officer's voice carried a note of pure terror. "I'm detecting a transmission from the collapse zone." The view screen flickered to life, showing a figure standing in what appeared to be empty space. David Cross looked exactly as he had when he'd entered Zone Omega 6 hours earlier. Except for one small detail, he was glowing. "Admiral Zethakri," Cross said pleasantly. "We need to talk." The alien admiral stared at the impossible human floating in the wreckage of his most powerful weapon. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a civilization that was suddenly terrifyingly uncertain about its place in the universe. "Commander Cross, you appear to have survived your experience." "Survived?" Cross laughed, and the sound sent shivers through every Hegemony ship in the system. "Admiral, I didn't survive Zone Omega." He leaned closer to the camera, his glowing eyes fixed on Zethakri with laser intensity. The laughter echoed through subspace itself. It started with Cross, standing in the wreckage of Zone Omega, his form wreathed in impossible light as he faced down the galaxy's most feared military force. But then something unprecedented happened. 8,000 human voices joined in, their mirth transmitted across 37 light-years of space through quantum entanglement channels that shouldn't have existed. And finally, from across the galaxy, humanity itself began to laugh. Every human colony, every frontier outpost, every exploration vessel that had been lying low and hoping to avoid the Hegemony's attention suddenly lit up the communications networks with a sound that had never been heard before in galactic history. An entire species expressing simultaneous, unified amusement at their would-be destroyers. Aboard the Hegemony flagship, Zethakri felt something he'd never experienced in 3 centuries of conquest and expansion. "Fear." "Admiral," his tactical officer reported. Mandibles clicking with barely controlled panic, "we're detecting massive energy signatures throughout human space. Every colony, every ship, every outpost, they're all powering up weapons systems simultaneously." "Impossible." "Our intelligence reports indicated minimal military capabilities outside of their core worlds." "Sir, I think our intelligence was wrong." On the main display, Cross continued to float in the void where Zone Omega had once existed. The dimensional collapse had left behind something that defied every law of physics the Hegemony understood, a stable pocket of space-time that responded to human will as if reality itself had developed a preference for their species. "Let me explain what just happened," Cross said, his voice carrying across both the comm channel and something deeper, a frequency that touched the quantum foundations of consciousness itself. "Your Zone Omega was designed to break minds by exposing them to ultimate despair, but human minds don't work like that." He gestured, and the space around him shimmered with new possibilities. "We come from a world that tried to kill us every single day for 4 billion years. Our evolution didn't optimize for contentment or stability. It optimized for one thing above all else: the absolute refusal to give up. When you put that kind of mind into a place designed to manufacture hopelessness." Cross smiled, and stars were born in the darkness behind him. "Well, you get the opposite of what you were expecting." Zithkri's strategic implants were running probability calculations at maximum capacity, and every result pointed to the same impossible conclusion. You're suggesting that exposure to Zone Omega has somehow enhanced your capabilities. Enhanced? No, Admiral, Zone Omega didn't change what I am. It just stripped away everything that was hiding it. The truth hit Zithkri like a stellar collapse. The hegemony's greatest fears about humanity hadn't been about what they were, but about what they might become. And Zone Omega, designed to break the strongest minds in the galaxy, had instead been used as a chrysalis. Science Officer Veltareth to the bridge, he commanded. The serpentine xenobiologist arrived moments later, her scales now locked in a color that indicated species-level terror, deep black shot through with lines of electric blue. Admiral, she hissed, the readings are beyond my comprehension. The human isn't just surviving in that collapsed dimension, he's thriving. The energy signatures suggest he's somehow learned to manipulate the fundamental forces that hold reality together. That's impossible. Even our most advanced species required millions of years of evolution to develop psychic capabilities. Perhaps, Veltareth said slowly, that's because your other species evolved on worlds that didn't actively try to kill them. The human homeworld, Earth, is what we classify as a Class 12 death world. The evolutionary pressures there would have... She paused, her forked tongue flicking out to taste the chemical signatures of her own fear, unprecedented. On the viewscreen, Cross had begun to move through the void with casual ease, each step taking him across impossible distances as space-time folded around his will. As he approached the hegemony fleet, every sensor on every ship began screaming warnings about energy readings that shouldn't exist. He stopped directly in front of the flagship's main viewscreen, close enough that they could see the details of his face, calm, confident, and utterly without fear. We're the solution. Before Zithkri could respond, every human colony in known space activated simultaneously. What the hegemony had taken for primitive settlements revealed their true nature, hidden weapons platforms that had been disguised as civilian infrastructure for decades. Massive energy cannons emerged from what had appeared to be agricultural facilities. Stealth frigates decloaked from behind moons that the hegemony had never bothered to scan properly. And from Earth itself, something began to emerge that made every alien sensor array shut down in self-preservation. Impossible, Zithkri breathed. Our scouts reported minimal military development. Your scouts, Cross replied with gentle amusement, saw exactly what we wanted them to see. Rule number 1 of surviving on a death world: never let the predators know how dangerous you really are until it's too late for them to run. The massive shape emerging from Earth's gravity well resolved into something that violated every principle of military engineering the hegemony understood. It was a ship, but calling it that was like calling a supernova a candle. The vessel stretched across thousands of kilometers, its hull composed of materials that seemed to bend light around them. Along its surface, geometric patterns pulsed with the same impossible energy that surrounded Cross. Meet the TCS Retribution, Cross said proudly. Humanity's first reality-class dreadnought. We've been building her for the last century, just in case someone decided our species needed correction. Veltareth's scales had gone completely white with terror. Admiral, that ship, it's not just large, it's existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The humans have somehow learned to build vessels that exist partially outside normal space-time. How is that possible? By studying a species that spent 4 billion years learning to survive the impossible, Cross answered. Every single human carries the genetic memory of ancestors who looked at insurmountable odds and said, "Watch me." When you put that kind of determination together with advanced technology, the Retribution fired. Not at the hegemony fleet, but past them, a demonstration shot that traveled through folded space to strike an uninhabited star system 17 light-years away. The effect was visible through the flagship's sensors as an entire solar system simply stopped. The star froze mid-fusion. The planets hung motionless in their orbits, time itself ground to a halt in a perfect sphere of crystallized causality. That's a temporal displacement cannon, Cross explained helpfully. We call it the timeout. It freezes a localized area of space-time indefinitely. The star system will remain exactly as it is for approximately 10,000 years, then resume normal operation as if nothing happened. We developed it as a non-lethal alternative to traditional stellar-class weapons. Zethkri's worldview was collapsing faster than Zone Omega had. Non-lethal? Well, yes. We could have built weapons that simply destroyed things. But where's the challenge in that? Any species can learn to break things. It takes real creativity to break the fundamental forces of the universe without actually hurting anyone. Around the hegemony fleet, space began to shimmer as more human vessels appeared, not emerging from hyperspace but literally stepping sideways from parallel dimensions. Each ship bore the same reality-warping characteristics as the Retribution, their hulls existing in a state of quantum superposition that made conventional targeting impossible. You see, Admiral Cross continued, now somehow standing directly on the flagship's bridge, despite the fact that he'd been floating in open space moments before. Humanity spent the last 3 centuries preparing for this exact scenario. Every colony you thought was defenseless was actually a research facility. Every primitive outpost was a weapons platform. Every exploration ship was a scout vessel mapping dimensional weak points. The bridge crew had drawn their weapons, but Cross paid them no attention. He was examining a holographic display with the casual interest of a tourist reading a museum placard. The hegemony has ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years based on a simple principle: overwhelming technological superiority. But you made one crucial mistake. You assumed that because we hadn't shown you our technology, we didn't have any. Cross turned to face the Admiral directly, his eyes still carrying that impossible inner light. Humans are persistence predators, Zethkri. We don't attack when our prey is strong. We follow them, tire them out, wait for them to make mistakes, and for 3 centuries, we've been following the hegemony across the galaxy, learning your weaknesses, studying your technology, preparing for the day when you'd finally overreach. This is impossible. A single species cannot develop reality manipulation technology in just 300 years. Our greatest civilizations required millennia. Your greatest civilizations, Course interrupted gently, evolved on garden worlds where the biggest threat was running out of fruit. Humans evolved on a planet where the volcanoes had volcanoes, where the weather was actively trying to kill us, where the very bacteria were engaged in biological warfare against anything stupid enough to exist. He gestured toward the viewscreen, where the human fleet had formed a perfect sphere around the hegemony vessels. When you've spent 4 billion years learning to solve impossible problems, 3 centuries is more than enough time to figure out how to manipulate a few fundamental forces. Zethkri felt his forearms trembling as the full scope of humanity's deception became clear. What do you want? Want? Cross laughed, and the sound carried notes of genuine warmth. Admiral, I think you're still misunderstanding the situation. This isn't about what we want, it's about what we're offering. Offering? The hegemony has spent 50,000 years building the galaxy's most sophisticated civilization. You've eliminated war between the major species, established trade networks that span thousands of light-years, created art and science and philosophy that enriches everyone under your rule. It's genuinely impressive. Cross walked over to the central command console and casually placed his hand on the controls. Instantly, every system on the ship responded to his touch as if he'd been authorized at the highest levels. But you've also stagnated. 50,000 years of the same leaders, the same policies, the same solutions to the same problems. The galaxy has become comfortable, safe, predictable. And that's bad? Cross grinned, and in that expression Zethkri saw the echo of every human who had ever looked at an impossible challenge and decided to try it anyway. Admiral, comfort is the enemy of growth. Safety is the death of innovation. Predictability is just another word for extinction through irrelevance. Around them, the bridge's holographic displays came alive with new information, star charts showing previously unknown regions of space, scientific databases containing discoveries the hegemony had never imagined. Humanity isn't here to destroy the hegemony, Kors said softly. We're here to evolve it, to push it. To be the irritant that forces the galaxy's greatest civilization to become something even greater. He turned back to Zethkri, his expression serious now. The universe is vast, Admiral Ian. Infinite, in ways your people have never imagined. There are threats out there that make humanity look like children playing with toys. Ancient things that devour civilizations, cosmic entities that treat entire galaxies as their personal feeding grounds. The hegemony's current level of technology and thinking isn't going to be enough when those things finally notice us. Veltereth slithered forward, her scales cycling through colors of confusion and curiosity. You're saying there are greater threats than your species? We're not a threat, Cross replied, with infinite patience. We're an opportunity. Think about it. Every great leap forward in hegemony civilization has come from contact with new species, new ideas, new ways of thinking. But for the last 10,000 years you've been recycling the same concepts because you conquered everyone who might challenge you. He gestured toward the tactical display where the human fleet maintained its perfect formation. Until now, Zethkri's tactical implants were running combat scenarios, but every simulation ended the same way, total defeat for the hegemony forces. Not through superior firepower, but through technological advantages so complete that fighting would be like throwing spears at starships. What are your terms? The Admiral asked quietly. And if we refuse? Cross's expression grew sad. Then you'll stagnate and die, and in a few million years when the real threats arrive, they'll find a galaxy full of beautiful ruins inhabited by species that forgot how to grow. Around the bridge, the hegemony crew exchanged glances filled with uncertainty. Everything they'd believed about galactic power structures had just been turned inside out. There's something else, Kors continued. Zone Omega wasn't just a prison, it was a gateway. When I broke through its barriers, I didn't just free myself. I opened a connection to something the hegemony has been seeking for millennia. What connection? Veltereth asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. Cross smiled, and suddenly the bridge was filled with a presence that defied description. Not visible, not audible, but undeniably there. Ancient, wise, and utterly alien. The architects, Kors said simply. The species that built the first stargates, that seeded the galaxy with the fundamental technologies the hegemony is based on. They've been waiting in higher dimensions for someone capable of reaching them. Zethkri's exoskeleton went rigid with shock. The architects are myth, legend. They vanished 1,000,000 years ago. They didn't vanish. They transcended. Moved to a level of existence where they could observe and guide without interfering. But they've been watching, waiting for a species with enough potential to join them in pushing the universe toward its next evolutionary phase. The presence on the bridge grew stronger, and suddenly every member of the crew could sense it. A consciousness so vast and complex that it made their own minds feel like flickering candles in comparison. "Greetings," came a voice that bypassed their ears entirely, speaking directly to their consciousness. "We have waited long for this moment." Veltereth's scales had shifted to a color none of her species had ever displayed, pure white shot through with golden threads that seemed to pulse with their own light. "Impossible," she whispered. "The architects, they're real. Reality is larger than your current understanding encompasses," the voice continued. "The human Desenecation Cross has demonstrated the capacity for dimensional transcendence. Through him, we extend an invasion to all species. Join us in the next phase of galactic evolution." Cross nodded toward Zethkri. "The choice is yours, Admiral. Humanity can show you the way forward, or you can maintain the status quo until entropy catches up with you. But understand, with or without the hegemony, we're moving forward. The universe is too big and too interesting to stay in one small corner forever." The Admiral's 4 arms moved through complex patterns as he processed information at the limits of his enhanced cognition. Around him, his crew waited for a decision that would reshape the galaxy. Finally, Zethkri spoke. "Commander Cross, David, what you're proposing would require dismantling 50,000 years of civilization." "Not dismantling," Kors corrected gently. "Upgrading. Think of it as Hegemony 2.0, all the benefits of your current system, but with unlimited expansion potential and the ability to face whatever the universe throws at us. The choice must be made freely," the architect presence added. "We will not compel participation, but neither will we extend this opportunity indefinitely. The universe moves toward its next phase with or without your consent." Zethkri looked around his bridge one final time, seeing his crew's faces. Some terrified, some excited, all of them realizing they stood at a crossroads that would determine the fate of everything they'd ever known. "If we agree," he said slowly. What happens to the hegemony? It becomes something better, Cross replied. The Galactic Commonwealth, a true partnership between species, where differences are celebrated instead of suppressed, where every world contributes to the greater whole based on their unique strengths. And humanity's role in this commonwealth. Cross grinned, and in that expression lay the promise of adventures beyond imagination. We'll be what we've always been, Admiral. The species that looks at the impossible and says, watch this. Dimensional barriers are weakening me, the architect warned. The decision point approaches. Around the fleet, reality itself began to shift and flow like water. The barriers between dimensions grew thin, revealing glimpses of other universes where different choices had led to different outcomes. In some, the hegemony had rejected humanity's offer and slowly faded into obscurity. In others, the partnership had led to wonders beyond description. Cities that existed in pure thought, art forms that reshaped the quantum foundations of matter, explorations into realms where mathematics and music became indistinguishable. Zithkri closed his 4 eyes and made the choice that would echo through eternity. Very well, he said quietly. Let us begin. The transformation was immediate and overwhelming. Every hegemony ship in the fleet suddenly found its systems upgrading themselves, incorporating technologies that had been theoretical moments before. The crew members felt their minds expanding, not through force but through invitation. As new possibilities opened in their consciousness, Cross laughed with pure joy as the dimensional barriers dissolved completely. Welcome to the next phase of galactic evolution. Through the dissolving walls of reality they could see it. The true scope of what they were joining, civilizations beyond counting, species that existed as pure energy, worlds where thought became reality and dreams took physical form. The galaxy wasn't just a collection of stars and planets, it was a living entity, growing and evolving towards something magnificent. The journey begins, the architect presence announced, and suddenly every being in the fleet could feel it. A sense of purpose so vast and thrilling that their previous concerns seemed microscopic by comparison. Zethkri looked at Cross with something approaching awe. All this time we thought you were the threat, but you were the answer. Both, Cross corrected with a grin. The best solutions usually are. As the human and hegemony fleets began to merge into something new and unprecedented, Cross sent one final message across the quantum networks to every human colony in the galaxy. Phase 1 complete. Time to show the universe what happens when Deathworlders get serious about having fun. The response came back from 8,000 colonies simultaneously. Not words, but laughter. The kind of laughter that reshapes reality through pure, infectious joy. And somewhere in the depths of space, ancient entities that had slumbered for eons began to stir, drawn by the sound of a species that had learned to find humor in the face of cosmic horror. They were about to discover why the galaxy's newest players were called Deathworlders, and why that might be the best thing that had ever happened to the universe. 6 months later, the first joint hegemony human exploration vessel crossed the dimensional barrier into what the architects called the Greater Spiral, a region of space-time where universes intersected and impossible things became routine. Aboard the ship, Commander Cross stood beside Admiral Zethkri on a bridge that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, watching as reality unfolded into configurations that had no names in any known language. Any regrets? Cross asked. Zethkri's mandibles clicked in what both species had learned to recognize as genuine amusement. Only one, that we waited so long to try this. Behind them, Valtereth worked alongside human scientists to catalog phenomena that rewrote physics textbooks with each observation. The partnerships that had seemed impossible 6 months ago now felt as natural as breathing. On the view screen, something vast and beautiful resolved out of the cosmic background. A civilization of beings made from crystallized music, their cities singing across dimensions in harmonies that touched the quantum foundations of reality itself. Cross grinned at his alien partner. Ready to make some new friends? Zethkri's 4 arms moved in the gesture that had become their traditional response to impossible situations. After you, Deathworlder. And together they stepped forward into a universe that had suddenly become much larger, much stranger, and infinitely more interesting than either of their species had ever imagined possible. In the distance, barely detectable even by their enhanced sensors, something else stirred in the cosmic deep. Something that had noticed the laughter echoing through dimensions and was coming to investigate. Something that was about to learn why the inhabitants of one small blue world had never learned the proper definition of impossible. But that, as they say, is another story entirely.